Hi, I'm Keith Baker, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about medicine and whether or not we have a performance problem that needs repair. In addition, I'll point out the fact that expertise is not always being utilized in the domain of medicine. First, a little discussion about what we mean by an expert pathway. This really is about an approach to professional development aimed at always improving one's performance day after day, month after month, and so on. The idea here is not simply to become competent. In fact, if you look up the word competent in the dictionary, it's a fairly low bar, meaning sufficient, good enough, and so on. Instead, the goal here is to become particularly good, or what's called an expert in a domain, and that will be explained a little further on in the video. First, a comment or two about what goes into an outstanding performance. And so you can see in the center of this slide here, there's a little box with the term performance. And on the right here, it shows that it's basically an integration, that's the integral sign there, of many different factors. Many of them are written down here on the slide for you to see, some of which are easy to change, some of which are very hard to change. For example, ability, so to speak, like one's height, is very hard to change. I happen to be a tall person, that's just how it is. I can't become a shorter person if I want to. On the other hand, motivation is fairly malleable, and strategies are particularly open for alterations and adoption or neglect if you like. Other things have to do with cost management and goal orientation, which we've talked about a little bit before. And you'll see that strategies and goal orientation are really under your control in many circumstances and give rise to improved performance. I'd like to make a claim. Firstly, that medicine, as an example of a domain, actually is not what we think it is in terms of outstanding performance or expertise. So I want to show you a study that documents that, in fact, American medicine is not all it's cracked up to be at this point in time. This study was published in 2003, and the point here is that the quality of care given to American adults who saw the physician on a regular basis did not meet expected level of care in many occasions. So in this case, on average, this study found about half of Americans who went to see a physician for routine problems for which there was agreed upon care did not receive that level of care. This was not inherently incompetent care. This was simply not reaching the highest level of performance by any stretch of the imagination. Now, importantly, in this study, these were agreed upon types of performance that could be achieved if a physician so desired to do so. So this was an achievable outcome, and yet we fell short. This study is a little bit closer to home. I'm an anesthesiologist, and this study is a little bit fun because it used a number of physicians who wanted to improve their own care in terms of postoperative nausea and vomiting and its medicinal management. So beginning on the control over here on the bottom, you can see that these number of physicians, each shown here by a little dot or so, they developed their own guidelines for what acceptable postoperative nausea and vomiting prophylaxis would look like. So they decided what acceptable postoperative nausea and vomiting would be. They knew these guidelines, they wrote these guidelines, and as you can see here, they didn't do particularly well at achieving those guidelines. They then implemented their own decision support system to alert them when they were failing to achieve this level of performance and follow their own guidelines. You can see here with this red arrow that the level of performance that they then achieved once they got sufficient help with decision support rose immensely. It got to a very high level. The point here was that they were not achieving this level of performance by themselves. When they removed the decision support at a later date, you can see here, their performance fell back to the prior level. The whole point of this is to show that they identified what the expected level of performance was. They did not actually achieve that level, but it was an achievable goal as shown by the middle area here where decision support actually caused them improve their performance. So you can see that this was an achievable goal that they actually achieved with sufficient help, but it didn't come naturally to them. There are a couple of very foundational or elemental parts to expertise and traveling the expert pathway. One is adopting this thing called the learning orientation, which I think you've heard about in prior sessions. This really is a fundamental mindset to adopt to achieve expert performance. Without it, I don't think it's achievable. In addition, one has to adopt a series of strategies and approaches to actually make the improvements that they desire in their own practice. The most foundational is called deliberate practice, and we'll be talking about that in the next video. I'm going to assume that motivation is present. I want to give you a little picture as to what expertise looks like. Expertise in this context that I'm talking about is somebody who is able to outperform others in the same sort of domain or cohort. For example, to say that I can intubate patients better than the average American is not saying very much. I'm an anesthesiologist. But to say that I can intubate better than other people who are trained like me is saying that I have expertise in this domain. So an expert really is the best person, or the one who performs the best, among others who do that same activity. So what we have here are violinists at various stages of training. The very top person here is an adult expert. And what you can see while they're playing this music is that their musical bow angles that they use to play the violin are remarkably homogeneous. They say they can do the same activity again and again and again and play the exact same piece of music almost perfectly, repeatedly. As you see down here in the lower component, way down here, this is a child, a very novice player, and you can see their bow angle is all over the place. And if you've ever heard a child play music with a violin, it sounds all over the place. It's not a nice thing to hear. A little bit like anybody can occasionally sink a 10-foot putt, it is an elite performer who can reliably sink a 10-foot putt, as opposed to someone like me who's not a golfer who can sink a 10-foot putt by luck once in a blue moon. So expertise is the reliable outperformance of others in the same domain. So I want to thank you for this short visit on the Expert Pathway, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.